So this video is on cultural embodiment. I've done a few videos on this in the past, but most of them were quite a few years ago now. And since then I've been working around the globe a lot. I think I've worked in something like 50 countries now. And some of them I've worked in quite a lot. Like in Russia, I've been nearly 30 times. I speak some Russian now. I have a Ukrainian wife. You know, I've got lots of Russian friends. Some of those cultures I've got to know pretty well. I've lived in about 6 countries as well. And I'm from a cross-cultural family in that my family are Irish immigrants. I grew up in the UK. I've lived in the States and France and Ireland, a few places. So just to give you an idea of my background, where I'm coming from. I guess a lot of you know watching this channel, I'm a specialist in working with the body, particularly the area of embodiment. So this is the idea that who we are is partly as a result of the body. We're embodied in who we are. It's not just a piece of meat. And this is how you can see culture, okay? So culture is not just an abstract thing. It's a bodily pattern that spreads between us. How do I know this is the case? Well, let me give you an example. I'm on a beach in Mallorca. I'm sunbathing on a beach. I'm on holiday, pretty standard British thing to do. And there's a guy there who's doing Thai massage. He's going around and he's talking to people. And everyone's just in bathing costumes. So everyone is dressed identically. And this guy knows where you're from. Because in Mallorca, there are Russians, there are Swedes, there are Germans, there are Dutch, there are English. And we all kind of, if you just take those nationalities, we all look pretty similar. Like I could be mistaken for Russian. Что? Okay, yeah, so it's like, you could be like in Sweden, a bit short maybe. I basically could be any of those countries. This guy knew immediately where you were from and he would talk to you in your own language. Smart guy. He was watching people. He was watching how they moved, how they walked. And you know, you can spot this. You can spot the Italians at an airport or whatever. There are cliches around this. You know, you could get racist about this, but actually this culture, it lives in the body. There's a certain stiffness to certain cultures, a certain looseness to other cultures. You know, right down to certain patterns of tension. You know, you'll see, like, for example, a lot of Poles in England, I've been there a lot of time, will have this tension pattern around the deltoids and the heart area, yeah? Or the Russian smile, that's the classic one. This is the, you know, the lack of affect in the jaw and the face, yeah? Israelis will have a particular movement pattern which is sudden, direct and linear. Da, 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 da. Yeah, you'll see that a lot in Israel. Someone threw a menu on the table at me and I was like in a restaurant, oh, fucking hell. It's a move, even though it's like totally no need to. So it's a movement pattern and these can be misinterpreted. Like let's take that example, linear, direct and abrupt. I'm using Laban movement analysis terms. These are objective terms I'm using. Can be interpreted as anger or hate. Da, as opposed to da, yeah? So that's why Israelis might come across as seeming aggressive or rude, for example, to other people. It's as much a bodily pattern as anything else, and that's in their culture. Which brings me to trauma. So trauma is another thing we'll see in culture. Russia and Israel, 2 countries I've worked a lot. I've also worked in West Africa, East Africa, Afghanistan, all over the Middle East. Culture exists in the body. And trauma exists in the body. So you'll see, for example, the tension patterns, the numbing, a slowness. You'll see a numbing in most of Eastern Europe, particularly in Russia. All that hyperarousal, the Israeli hyperarousal, the adrenals being stuck on go, the readiness to be reactive, that's in the body. You'll see those 2 patterns of either numbing or hyperarousal in traumatized cultures. Loads more I could say about that, but this isn't a specialist trauma video. Other patterns, you know, as an embodiment teacher, the level of just looseness in the body, the level of movement, the level of activation. You know, I lived in Brazil and there's a kind of movement in their hips, which in England is not normal, yeah? Gender patterns, you know, in Russia and Ukraine, quite extreme gender roles. And you know, I remember doing like watery flowing things and this guy in Ukraine just went, "Yet, I will not do it." Just to him, it was just like girly or gay or too female, you know. Whereas like this pattern in Brazil, it'd just be considered like sensual and cool and men dance and, you know, it's no big deal, you know. So whether sexuality is alive in the body, this is, I think, is a big one. Yeah, you know, how emotional the country is. You know, I had this Colombian girlfriend, she'd be like, "In Colombia, there is fruit as big as your head." This kind of heartiness to her, yeah. So what do we got? Hips, heart, you know, the level of tension in the face, you're definitely seeing the expressiveness, generally the cliches of the Italians, the Mediterraneans, for example, or the containedness, that very British containedness, which is also very Japanese, to be in this way. Yeah, as opposed to Australia, mate, we're fucking way out here, innit? Hey, white, yeah, in your face. Terribly sorry about the bad accents, by the way. That's not my trade, but it helps me get into character. My wife, for example, hated Australia because she's a very private person. So even though we're culturally embodied, we also have our personalities. So she's a very introvert, private person. And, you know, this is not to say everyone from a country is a certain way, because we have our personalities as well. And she liked this. She liked Japan because people kept space and they kept this distance. You know, they're very in the back, like Ethiopians too, actually, very in the back. And she liked that people didn't get into her face, whereas Australia is much more forward. You tend to find the New World generally, America, Brazil, Australia, it's much more forwards, and there's an intrusive quality to a lot of Australians, whereas in New Zealand, it's a little bit more, you know, from New Zealand, I'm here, it's a little bit more contained again, like the Japanese. So we can talk about containment. We're Irish, my Irish side's a bit less contained than my English side. What else can we talk about? Like sensual modes, like there's a way in which like the French are tasting life, like there's a tasting of life, whereas some cultures feel more feely, yeah, or more musical. Dylan Newcomb had a system called, his embodiment teacher I really respect, he had a system called Uzazu, and he would use sounds to explore embodiment and culture. You know, like a French one is yeah. If you make that sound, a little piece of cheese, oh, fuck you, I'm French. There's a little piece of Frenchness in that, as opposed to, oh, which for me is like Jamaican, man. It's like more Caribbean. It's got more of a, and oh, there's a polarity in that that's quite different. Another one I've seen is Embodied Yoga Principles. In this system, we have 26 postures. And as I teach this around the world, they're all archetypal, so all universal, but certain cultures really struggle with some. So we have an authority pose, which the Germans struggle with because it can look like that. And actually that's an illegal gesture in Germany. It's literally illegal. It's a very unusual thing to do something illegal with your body that doesn't affect and impact, you know, directly another human being. But anyway, so sometimes direct things and sometimes indirect things, like we have a judgment pose, you know, which the French can often feel quite at home in, particularly Parisians actually. People are going to say, yeah, but what about New York is different from Hawaii? Yes, 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 there are differences within countries. However, people overstate those. All right, so you know, there is a West Coast hey up, as opposed to like a New Jersey. There is a different embodiment, you know, to different parts of the States, somewhere big like that, for example. And St. Petersburg and Moscow have a slightly different vibe. Actually, my colleague Vilya in Moscow can even tell what part of Moscow you're from your embodiment. In England, it tends to be class-based. The more upper classes, the more up, and the more lower class, down here, yeah? You know what I mean, mate? It's more down, yeah? Anyway, where was I? So, culture, sounds. Oh, yes. So back to EYP. We have different poses. Different countries can have quite different reactions to them. Some countries are over or under boundaried, for example. Let's say I did authority pose in Romania and everyone kind of spaced out. There was this weird Ceausescu related thing going on. Whenever I do self-care pose with Russian women, they often cry because there's a real kind of way in which women are very hard on themselves and how they look and things like that there. It's quite sad. What else? Sensuality pose is like finding that really sensual, some might say feminine form. And whenever I do that in Sweden, they also dislike authority pose. Whenever I do that in Sweden, people really struggle, or Holland, because there's like a flatness to gender there. So if you do something sort of sexy, they feel a bit uncomfortable, you know, particularly the women. Or in the Netherlands, some of the gender stuff is reversed. So like the men find warrior pose, like this is just really aggressive. And the Netherlands is another interesting one. They have a lot of down, and I think it's to do with like the country's built on water. And there's something about like women there will have feet wider than hip width apart. So their feet will be wider than hip width apart. And it's partly a gender thing and to do with feminism, but it's also, I think, about the country is not solid. So there's a way in which people are looking for solidity in the body. Yeah, the base one's fascinating. So this, for example, is a Russian leg cross. This is a piece of body language that's getting really popular around the world now, but it makes you tremendously unstable. I think it originally comes from ballet. You'll see women do this a lot in Russia, and in more gender polarized countries, you'll see women generally taking up less space. So you could have a kind of feminist narrative of this as well. And then in the more feminist countries like Sweden and Holland, you'll see women like with this wider base, yeah? So that's one that I see depending on the sort of gender roles quite a lot in a country, just as one example. Yeah, so let me hit a few more countries. America, you see a lot of space taking. I remember at the end of an EYP workshop, we asked everyone to take their favorite posture. And there's a picture from one of the American trainers, and everyone's doing taking up space posture. You'll see that. It's, you know, America literally has more room, and you'll see this even like when I've done groups, Americans will talk more than English people, for example. What other countries could I mention? I mean, I've been all around the world, so you see these different patterns. In teaching, you see different patterns too. Like some countries like things to be very clear and logical. And let's say Russia a lot, for example, this could be a trauma pattern, actually, people wanting predictability, like A, B, C. The level of direction people want is different. Like, I remember one time in Denmark, we discussed for 15 minutes about whether to take a 10-minute break or not, because it has to be quite egalitarian. In Russia, you just tell people what to do, power, authority, they call it a power gradient is important, yeah? So understanding how that lives in the body and how that lives as a trainer, how much clarity people want. They call this uncertainty avoidance in cultural studies. And just generally sort of how we might say yin or yang a culture is. You know, New York, pretty yang. Moscow, Hong Kong, pretty yang. Big cities generally. And then somewhere like Bali or Hawaii, you know, super yin. But it also means people might not tell you when something's wrong or hold a boundary. So as a trainer, I want to be a bit careful of that in those cultures. Okay, so remember, don't get upset. This isn't racism. This is cultural trends. Individuals can be different. And I think it's fascinating to become aware of this and start. Culture's like the taste of your own mouth. No one thinks they have a culture. It's like, I was in America recently and someone's like, oh my God, you have an accent. And I was like, yes, and so do you. We all have an accent. We all have a culture. Some people say, I'm a citizen of the world. And I'd say, well, that's a nice aspiration, but tell me where you're from. Yeah, most people, even if their dad's Nigerian, their mum's Japanese, and they grew up in Peru and China, that's still only 4 cultures. Okay, so we do have these cultural influences. To deny it is to deny part of ourselves. They don't have to determine us, but they are part of our embodiment. And this is one of the beauties for me of traveling and having students from around the world, is seeing these, and we consistently see these on, say, EFC when students come from all over. Differences in speed, differences in space taking, differences in gender stuff. It's a really big part of embodiment. So I hope you found this interesting. I'm a bit obsessed with this subject. I find it fascinating. So yeah, incorporate that into your learning.